I remember we had an epiphany about the fact that we were kind of laissez-faire managers, and that just wasn't working for our team.
If you went to the zoo for the weekend and I didn't go with you, it was like, okay, good. I'm glad you had a good weekend. Do we need to talk about it? And maybe that came from where my background and where I came from, in that, I had worked before being self-employed. I'd worked for people that love to tell stories and love to kind of grandiosize, or whatever, that's probably not a word, but really make everything they did sounded amazing. I remember, we started doing staff lunches every month. And I remember how much the staff looked forward to that.
As a leader of a business, there needs to be some emotional distancing between your team and yourself.
Yes.
And I find that for management as well. It's very hard to be best friends and hang out with those who report to you outside of the business.
It's been such an interesting journey along the way, as we've both learned.
Good day and welcome to Business Alchemy. I am Beth Mast, and I'm here with my life partner and business partner, Jonathan Mast. And today I would love to talk to you about our leadership journey. Over the years of working together, more than almost a couple decades now, we have grown a lot as leaders and knowing how to lead our individual teams. And Jonathan, welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to have this conversation today.
I am too. Hey, I want to recall back years and years ago about a conversation we had at a restaurant. I think it was called Eat at Olives, and we were sitting there kind of wondering why our team wasn't doing what we wanted them to do. And I remember we had an epiphany about the fact that we were kind of laissez-faire managers, and that just wasn't working for our team. Do you remember that conversation?
I do, yeah. And I remember being really befuddled at the moment about why the team just didn't seem to kind of get it, so to speak. And didn't, to you and I, at least to me, it seemed so easy. And so I don't understand. And yeah, like you said, it was kind of like one of those duh moments. And we had an epiphany.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we both tried very hard not to be the other end of that, which is micromanagers. I know I have been micromanaged before by previous bosses, and I'm one that really likes to have my own, what's the word I'm looking for? Just initiative. I like to take my own initiative. I like to kind of be free and work independently and make my own decisions and problem solve. And so I didn't want to be a micromanager for our employees, but I think we went too far the other way and we weren't really getting out of them what we needed. So we had to come up with a new game plan, basically kind of recenter ourselves and be the kind of leaders that they needed us to be. And I remember we started kind of with the why, why do we need to be good leaders? And we'd already kind of figured that out in the fact that our employees just weren't able to give us the work that we desired and the behaviors that we desired because we weren't demonstrating or modeling for them. So I think that was the first thing that we really did, and that I would encourage other people to really model for their employees the kind of behavior that they want them to show. Did you experience that with your sales team and marketing team when you were working at some of our previous businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. I think not having done a lot of management at the time, to me, I was the type of person that I just wanted you to give me an objective and then stay out of my way. If I'm an adult. If you hired me to go do something, that was great, but don't then micromanage me. And I think that I carried that way too far in the management of the team by assuming that if I had told them once what the objective was, that from there on out, they'd be good to go. And definitely found out that was not the case, and that we needed some more touch points, and that we could do that without being the overbearing, micromanaging managers that had really drove me nuts, and probably what drove me to entrepreneurship ultimately, because of some of those overbearing, micromanaging, you've got to do this task because I want you to do it, not because it adds any value, not because it helps you achieve the goal, but because I've decided that this needs to be done. And I wanted to avoid that so much that I think, like you said, we went too far the other way and didn't provide enough direction and enough examples. And I don't think we were intentionally modeling what we wanted them to do. I mean, we were trying to do the best we could, but I don't think we actually thought through, all right, I need to do the following things in order to model what I want my team to do and to be able to demonstrate that to them. We just kind of thought they would get it, so to speak, and they didn't.
So with some of those issues that we were finding we were having by being essentially laissez-faire, you and I had chatted about, well, what should we do? And one thing that we did is we actually sought help from other people, books, podcasts. We were in a mastermind at the time. I remember talking to that gentleman about the issue. And one of the things that we found that we had to do right off was basically just really start to establish rapport with our team. And I mean, I think we all got along, but we needed to make sure that we did those regular touch points with them, like one-on-one meetings, check-ins with them to see how they were doing. So I think it really helped if they felt we were truly concerned about them and wanted to help them do their job really well. And I noticed this really in operations. Your sales team was kind of a different type of entity.
Yes.
What did you find really worked for you with the sales team in particular?
Well, I don't know if I ever figured it out because, as you know, it was always an area that I struggled with. But I think one of the things I remember implementing after that discussion we had at the restaurant was that we began doing daily kind of stand-ups. And I don't remember whether we implemented them at the beginning of the day or the end of the day. I think actually we did both. And I remember that really made a big difference because it really set the team on track for here's what your big rocks are for today. Here's what we're trying to accomplish today. And at the end of the day, it was great because they knew there was an accountability, not like, uh-oh, you're in trouble because you didn't do this. But there was an opportunity to share how the day went, to deal with any issues. And I remember at the time, especially because I was super busy in appointments and running around and, trying to run a business like you were. I mean, you were ops. Well, I was sales and marketing. You were everything else. And, that meant we had busy schedules, and it made sure that the team had 2 touch points a day. And I remember we tried to keep those to about 15 minutes, but that they knew they'd be able to get their questions answered so that they wouldn't go for days because they didn't ask a question or because maybe I wasn't in the office when they were in the office, because those were the days when instead of Zoom, we literally drove to places and had meetings. I can hardly remember that anymore. But, so I would be out on the road meeting with clients and at networking events and doing all that. And it made sure that every day they knew at least they were going to have a couple of touch points. And I think the thing that surprised me about that most wasn't the fact that, I didn't want to do it because I didn't want people to feel like, okay, well, we hadn't thought about it, but I didn't want to do a lot of meetings because I didn't like meetings. But what I found is that it's not that people didn't think we would answer their questions. It's just when we didn't meet with them regularly, these questions would pile up, and then, kind of like everything else, they'd start falling off the edges of their mind, and they'd never get answered. And as a result, over the course of days or weeks when that would happen, they just kind of felt like they were afloat at sea without a sailboat without any wind, just floating and didn't really know where to go. And I think that daily, twice a day meeting, the morning kickoff, and then the end of the day both worked well. And I remember, at least for me, to me, I'm like, man, we're going to blow an hour every day for every employee when we do this because we're going to just give that productivity up. What I didn't realize is it was kind of like the old parable of sharpening the axe, that, you can cut a lot of wood if you've got an axe, but if you don't stop occasionally to sharpen the axe, you're actually going to cut less wood because of the fact that that axe is going to get dull, and the more effort you do isn't going to do anything. And I didn't realize at the time that we needed to essentially sharpen the axe of our team by giving them that daily feeding, so to speak, of here's what we're doing and building some of that camaraderie. I'm probably more social now than I was then, but I remember at that point, I didn't really care how your weekend was. We were at work. Why were we going to talk about the weekend? I mean, I wasn't that social.
Hmm.
and I was very task oriented. That German in me was coming through, and we were going to get our tasks done, and that was just who I was at that time. And I really had to understand that, there were a lot of people that didn't have that same German blood in them. That they wanted to talk about their weekend for a few minutes, and they wanted to share some fun things. And I was the taskmaster, not really, but I'm looking at the clock, going, it's 8:15, we're still talking. That's 15 minutes worth of prospecting we haven't done. And that was hard for me to get over, admittedly.
Yeah, that's really funny because I always kind of visualized you as a slightly more extroverted person, but we've talked about your Kersey Bates and if you're
Hmm.
extroverted and introverted, and you actually are quite a mix of both. So that's really interesting that you bring that up. But I think your point of availability is really crucial because I had some of the same issues in that when you're not available enough for your team and you can't answer those questions as they need them to be answered so that they
Hmm.
can get their work done, they get very frustrated, and there's just kind of this dark cloud as they try to chase around and try to find you or try to struggle, or they're trying to answer a question they're really struggling with. And I find that one of the key behaviors of a good leader is that availability and just being available to your team when they
Hmm.
need you. Another one I find that's really critical that people really seem to appreciate was transparency. Transparency
Yeah.
of what was going on. And we definitely were very open with our team about our financials,
Hmm.
about, how were our sales going? What kind of expenses were we dealing with? What was our budget? What was our profit? What did we do with that profit? We
Yeah.
definitely invested that back into our employees by giving them raises and giving them bonuses and that type of thing. And that transparency really seemed to get their buy-in into the business. And I think encouraging that buy-in along with establishing that rapport like we were just talking about is really crucial. It also helps build morale among the team when they buy into what you're doing for the company. It builds morale, and when they see that you're available, it builds morale, and they're just much more engaged and happy to be part of it all. And I think that really really helps a lot. I'm like you, or in the fact that I'm a little more introverted in the fact that I just want to get my tasks done. So let's
Hmm.
do. I've got these 10 tasks, check them off. Feels good to check them off. So learning to engage with our employees on a one-to-one level and one-to-many level, I found was really critical, but also took a bit of work for me just to learn how to do that on a regular basis.
Oh, absolutely. And it probably sounds really crass when I go, I don't care about your weekend. It's not that I didn't really care, but I've never been an incredibly social creature. I mean, yes, I can go to networking events and I can fake it, and I can, I do enjoy other people's company. But I, if you went to the zoo for the weekend and I didn't go with you, it was like, okay, I mean, good. I'm glad you had a good weekend. Do we need to talk about it? And maybe that came from where my background and where I came from, in that, I had worked before being self-employed. I'd worked for people that love to tell stories and love to kind of grandiosize, or whatever, that's probably not a word, but really make everything they did sounded amazing. And I was
Hmm.
just sick of it. I was done with it. It was like, stop telling me how it, okay, so, in reality, we went down to the park and took the dog for a walk. But what they would tell everybody is that, they went on an excursion and they took this hike through the most amazing area, and all these things that they found, and, an artifact that they found that happened to be a Kit Kat wrapper that they picked up off this, and I'm probably exaggerating, but I'd felt that way where I had used to work when I was in the workforce, and that everybody was always trying to kind of one up themselves on what was happening.
Hmm.
And it's like, I hope you had a great weekend. I don't have a problem with that, but you don't care what I did, and or I don't expect you to, and I didn't really care what they did. And again, it probably sounds crass, but I realized I needed to develop some more of those social skills that I used in business, but I wasn't using in the office, if that makes sense. So if you were a client, I could carry on a conversation with you all day long about something I didn't care about if I knew that was going to help build rapport. But when we came into the office, it was kind of like coming home, and I didn't do that. It was something I needed to learn to do and be very purposeful about.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. Telling the story about, how the place you had worked previously kind of told these stories and made them so large and almost on a delusional level.
Hmm.
But that reminds me of a lot of drama. And you and I have not been drama people. In fact, we've gone out of our way to be calm and even keeled and supportive to our team without encouraging drama.
Yeah.
One, it distracts you from what you're trying to do. I think it encourages some perhaps bad behavior. And the other thing is that it's uncomfortable for other people because a lot of people in the workspace are just there to get their work done, and they don't want all this drama on the side from some other employee who's lamenting about their boyfriend or their health or their dog
Exactly.
or whatever the case is, and making things larger than life to appease themselves and have an outlet for a problem they have at home where it really doesn't have a place at work. And I do believe that we tried to be very encouraging, and we started to institute some activities with our team that were regular, that were a little more socially focused. And that
Hmm.
really helped a lot because it was like giving them an opportunity to connect and build camaraderie among themselves, but
Yeah.
also with us as well. And then they didn't feel the need as much to kind of have hyperbole there at work during the day, which I thought was great. I really liked it.
Yeah. It was definitely a learning experience. I remember, and it makes sense to me now because, of course, it's 20 some years later. But I remember, we started doing staff lunches every month. And I
Hmm.
remember how much the staff looked forward to that and would talk about it. And we would make it a long lunch hour, generally an hour and a half. And we'd sit down in the conference room and we'd bring in food. We obviously provided the food, and we'd bring a bunch of food in, and we'd just sit and hang out for 60 to 90 minutes and chat and whatever. Now, we didn't have massive teams, so probably most we had 15 or 16 people in that at one time, and that was probably the max. Normally, it's probably closer to 10.
Hmm.
But I remember really being a little surprised how much people just liked that hanging out with no agenda. Because again, that was uncomfortable for me. I remember back then, that's prior to me being diagnosed with ADD, and so we didn't necessarily understand that how my brain worked and the type of things. But to me, again, it didn't serve any purpose. The weekends were when I took that downtime to hang out and do buddy stuff, but not in the workplace. And I never really considered the employees that we had to be friends per se. I always felt there had to be that line of delineation, so to speak. And
Right.
so that was a hard process. But I remember that specifically, that, boy, when we'd go to do lunch, and I remember for a long time we'd go pick up, croissants and breads and meats and cheeses and chips and all that and bring all that in. It was always surprising to me how much excitement the team seemed to have about that. Now, again, these were all pre-Zoom days when we were actually all in the office together, which I know is a
Right.
very odd thing today, but that would just, and it shouldn't have. In retrospect, it should have made sense, but it did. It really surprised me.
Well, breaking bread together and having meals together is just a great way to relax and get to know each other, get to know little things about each other that maybe you didn't know before. That just helps you connect, getting to know each other's personalities. All of
Hmm.
that's very helpful, and a lot of it you don't have time to do when you're in the daily grind of the day. But when you take a few minutes through lunch or a stand up or a break and you talk about some of those things, it really connects people. And just wasn't something that you and I were used to, just because we both do come from a very strong German and Dutch background where it's all about task management, checking things off the list, and really having a productive day without some of the emotional, regard. I do find that as a leader of a business, there needs to be some emotional distancing between your team and yourself.
Yes.
And I find that for management as well. It's very hard to be best friends and hang out with those who report to you outside of the business. I had one lady that worked for me. We worked very closely, and she was my right hand person. She got so much done for me. And I would have loved to have been just best friends with her, but we really didn't connect outside of work because I didn't want it to affect our working relationship. And she actually passed away from cancer about 5 years after working for us. And I was just devastated because I felt like she was a friend, even though we were work companions, not friends outside of work. But you spend 8 hours a day with someone and you're going to develop a relationship with them. And I think as a leader, there's a balance there. But I definitely
Absolutely.
recommend for people to keep in mind some level of emotional distancing. Doesn't mean you can't be friendly, doesn't mean you can't be concerned, but there's a strength and a leadership and a stability you have to provide
Yes.
without sharing too much of kind of our deep down fears or any doubts that we had. We had to kind of keep those aside. And thankfully, you and I had each other, so we talked about that type of thing a lot at home because we both led this company together. But we really couldn't do that with our employees because I'm a strong believer in collaborating up and leading down. So
Yes.
you and I collaborated together, but then we came forward every day as the leaders for our team.
Yeah, I remember that was another epiphany for me, which was kind of that collaborate up and lead down. In other words, when you need to collaborate with people that are at your organizational level. I don't mean to say level as far as human beings, but at your organizational level. So as an owner, I wasn't going to go collaborate with necessarily in but we wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't ask them for business decisions that we
Right.
wanted to do. We needed to provide them with leadership. And I struggled with that for a while because I wanted to be very collaborative. And I'm like, hey, we're thinking about doing this. What do you think? What do you think? And I learned
Hmm.
that caused a lot of insecurity in the team because they didn't see that there was somebody leading at the forefront that knew where they were going. And I know I personally had to learn that, again, you lead down. In other words, the people that are below you in the organization chart, and you need to lead them. You need to be confident, not arrogant, and not to the point that you're a dictator and not listening to what they have to say. You can be receptive without necessarily making them feel that you don't have a clue where you're going because they need that leadership. They want to know that there's a captain on the boat that knows where we're going and how we're getting there because they're just looking at their world and how they can do their job. And if they wanted to be a business owner, they probably would be. They wouldn't be doing all the things, they wouldn't be in their role that they are. And that was really a big thing for me to learn was that I had to collaborate with you as my peer, so to speak, in the business and maybe with my direct reports on some items, but for the most part, I had to lead my direct reports and be open to their input and kind of let them know I want your input, but also let them know that at the end of the day, I'm confident making a decision on this and I'm going to do so. And I always
Yeah.
kind of thought that was a little arrogant because mainly the background that I came from, the people that I'd worked for who were very authoritarian, I wanted to avoid some of that. But I like so many things, I went too far the other way, and I had to come back and say, okay, no, they need to be able to rely and know that, hey, this is my job, my career, and I'm comfortable that I'm being led by Jonathan and Beth in the right direction. They're willing to make the tough decisions. They're willing to decide what's going to go on because a lot of those staff members just didn't want that role, and
Right.
that was difficult for me to understand at that time.
Well, and you mentioned that we would get their input still, but we would have a
Yes.
framework that we would come to them within. For example, when we implemented the EOS system,
Yeah.
I remember we went and we figured out what's our vision and our mission and our values and our goals. Well, you and I put some of the basic framework together. Like we were pretty sure what our vision and our mission would be.
Yes.
But then we went to our management team, which were those direct reports that did a lot of the day-to-day management.
Hmm.
And this was after we got a little bit bigger and we actually had direct reports that did the
Yeah.
day-to-day management. But we went to them and said, okay, this is what we think. Let's talk about our vision. This is some of the components we believe should be part of that. And then we let them give us input on that. But we didn't come to them with a blank slate. It
Right.
was too many decisions for them then, too many things for them to figure out. And they felt, kind of floating out in the ether and they just didn't have anything to say. They didn't know. They weren't necessarily business leaders. They weren't necessarily leaders yet. And we wanted to teach them that, of course, by demonstrating some of these things, by getting their input. But we already had that framework. So I think that's really important to point that out, that we weren't
Hmm.
coming with nothing, but we were still collaborating with them. I remember putting together our shared values, and it absolutely was a shared process. I
Hmm.
remember talking about kind of the keys to, or the path to actually provide our services. What were kind of the key milestones of that? Absolutely. We talked to them about what some of those milestones were. I had some specific ones I knew of, so we'd
Hmm.
bring those up and then let them fill in the gaps. And I think that was just key. We had a lot of the big rocks already taken care of, but they filled in some of the other rocks and a lot of the sand. Which reminds me of that Stephen Covey video. It's out there. It's pretty old. I think it's from the early 90s, but where they talk about the big rocks and then how to put the big
Yes.
rocks into your day and fill this bowl. And yeah, it was very interesting. I love that because it has such an application just with how to also execute your tasks, but it also is a bit about setting the pace and modeling for those people who work for us.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. It's been such an interesting journey along the way. We've both learned a lot, and it's to me it's reminiscent, and of course it's a lot easier at 55 to look back on the last 25 years and go, wow, this, I don't understand why we didn't get it. But if I remember what it was like when I was 30 and 35, and as we were trying to lead this, and some of that even at 45, putting it together, it's it's where that experience, I think, became so relevant, because you and I both had very dynamic and specific experiences prior to getting into our agency. And as a result, at least speaking for myself, I was working harder to avoid acting like some of my employers had in the past than looking at the aspects that they had done well and trying to emulate those, because I was the typical employee at that time. I was frustrated because the boss made me do this, or the boss had this, or there was a stupid policy. And so I really was trying to avoid, Beth knows every policy I think is stupid, not really, but kind of at one moment or another. And so I think I was really working, especially in the early days, to avoid all of those things, as opposed to trying to emulate the things that they did that were successful. And it candidly took some feedback from team members. It took some hard knocks, and then some mentorship, as you mentioned, through some coaches that we had, and even other business owners that we surrounded ourselves with. As we talked through this whole process, one of the things that I remember was how important it ended up being that you and I surrounded ourselves with other business owners and had the opportunity to be in what I would call a safe environment with them, where we could go, I don't know what's going on here, but something's wrong. And that they would be able to, because of their experience, to be able to share things with us. It could help guide us through that. Because without that, I think, we'd still be struggling with a lot more than we are.
I think that having other business people as peers that we could talk to was huge. As a business owner, people who are employed by that business really can't comprehend the weight of being the business owner, being
Mm,
responsible for the
yeah,
sales, the structure,
yeah.
the marketing, the operations, the human
Payroll every Friday.
resources, the finances. Exactly. They really can't comprehend the weight of that. And I think so many people through movies and media have put this kind of evil fallacy of the business owner that, oh, they just have their millions of dollars and they go, have 3 houses and live at the beach and spend tons of money. And America is made up mainly of small business owners, and that
Yeah.
is not most of our lives. I remember for a good part of our marketing agency time, more than half of the 15, 14 years that I owned that, we had to make decisions of who got paid, and it was always the employees that got paid. We would
Always.
not always get paid. And so then we struggled and we didn't have some things, but we were so, confident and committed into making this business work and providing for our employees that I remember there were many paydays that we didn't get paid,
Oh, yeah.
and it's not like we had lots of money in the bank or anything like that, but we were so passionate about what we were doing that we moved forward. So you can't really share a lot of those things with the people that work for you because they're not going to have any sympathy or compassion for you, no empathy. They just don't understand. It's not a downfall on their part. They're just coming from a different angle. So having the peers, the business peers, man, that has been so helpful over the years to me personally.
Well, I mean, you talk about finances, and we could both share lots of stories of when things were tight, and sometimes when it's a wave. You have your times of abundance, and you have your times when it gets really tight, and it's still that way in business. But I remember talking to one of those people that we were in a mastermind group with, who had been in business for a number of years, and said, those ebbs and flows may have evened out to an extent, but they still happened. And this gentleman had been in business for many, many years, and I consider to be a very successful business person. And it was really enlightening for me to hear that, okay, we haven't totally screwed up just because of the fact that, things aren't working the way we want. But you also make a really good point, is that that was not a discussion we could share with our team.
Right.
And now we shared part of it, and that part was that you always get paid first. And that
Right.
actually came because of somebody that I had worked with in the past, who every time that money got tight in the company, he made a joke about the fact, well, I'm getting paid, but I don't know if I have enough money for you guys this weekend. And I just thought that was the worst possible leadership example to give. And so we tried to definitely do the opposite there. But there were times, I remember we had decided to take a family trip out west. And I remember we literally were, I think, in Arizona or New Mexico. I think it was New Mexico. And stepping out of the trailer so that the rest of the family didn't hear the discussion, and talking about the fact that we didn't get a big payment we were expecting, and payroll was due in 24 hours. And, we were going to be okay, but we were going to be really, really tight because of the fact that this payment hadn't come in from a vendor or from a client of ours. We still had to make payroll. We still had to do all that. And I remember going, crap, we're not out west yet. I mean, we're on our way, but do we turn around right now? Because I don't know if we have enough money to make the rest of the trip. And the reality is it all worked out, and it all normally does. But that's a discussion that we never shared with our team. We never once told
No.
them how you and I stepped outside of that RV. By the way, not a brand new one. It was a used one that we were using out there. And we're, at least myself, was pretty much in tears about the fact that, oh crap, the stress of wondering what are we going to do? Because we just had enough, I remember, to make payroll that week. And without that payment coming in, it's like, okay, what are we going to do? And that was, like you mentioned earlier, we don't like drama and we don't like those things. So we really tried to avoid those. And that was a discussion that could be shared with those peers in the masterminds that we had, but could not and should not, in my mind, have been shared with the team, because there's no reason to frighten them over things they have zero control over, and that we have since learned in the end almost always work out. But in those moments of panic, they can't see that. That's not good. That you don't want to see the captain of your ship panicking about a report that just came in. You want to see the confidence that the captain has to know that they're going to deal with whatever came up. And that was hard on occasion.
Well, and we've talked about, I mentioned transparency earlier. And there is a balance to that. I wasn't completely transparent. I didn't necessarily open up our business checking account for everybody to see what was in there and what was happening. But we would be transparent enough to give them kind of milestones and guideposts and give them updates and that type of thing so they knew where we were to encourage them. But also, if we were having a rough month, just to say, okay, what can we do to bring in a little more money this month? And then we
Right.
brainstorm as a team some ways to increase that revenue flow. So
Yes.
they felt empowered. And then when we did hit what we needed to hit, they were excited because they had part of that. They were part of that. And
Right.
they were, because without our team, we just had two people leading nothing. I mean, you need
Oh
other
yeah.
people executing a lot of the work. Obviously, when we first started, that wasn't the case, but it didn't take long for us to need people around us to help us run our business. And I think that there's some just practical application of things that we can do on a day-to-day basis as leaders to help instill confidence into our employees about us and about what we're doing. And I
Mm-hmm.
talked about transparency, and I talked about raising morale, and those are all great things to say. But what does that really mean? One of the things that we did right away, we had the stand up meeting in the morning, and
Yep.
then we had that brief stand up in the afternoon just to see if there were any questions or
Mm-hmm.
issues that we needed to complete. We also scheduled one-on-one meetings with our team. So anybody reporting to me, I would have a monthly one-on-one meeting where I'd just say, "Hey, how you doing? How you feeling? How's work going? Is there anything I can do for you? Do you need some resources or any tools that you don't have? What can I provide you to make you more comfortable and more successful at your job?" And
Yes.
having those one-on-ones were critically important. Also having quarterly meeting or quarterly rocks, setting goals quarterly, which is also part of the EOS system. That was huge, and we definitely
Yeah.
used our management team to help us build those. So that was big as well. And then encouraging people just individually, encouraging their professional development, encouraging their goals. It was hugely important. One of the things that I think that we didn't do enough of, because we figured people would get it, is training, and then
Mm,
repeating that
absolutely.
training, and then training again. Because I would think, oh, let's bring this up in a meeting and we'll train on this, and no, it'll be good. We don't need to cover it again. But they wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily retain it. And I know with your sales team and with marketing, you actually ran into that a bit, that you had to repeat things.
It seemed like ad nauseum. I mean, it was like, oh my gosh. I mean, we just talk about this 40 times last week? And of course, I'm exaggerating, but I've learned that that doesn't just apply with employees; it applies everywhere. Literally, just as back in October, I had a conversation with my current business coach, and we were actually talking about messaging from a marketing perspective. And I'm like, I feel like I'm saying this all the time, and he told me you need to say it every day. And I'm like, people are going to, and I think that in marketing and with employees, it works the same way. They say with radio advertising, if people are old enough to remember when we actually had radios that we listened to in the car instead of just streaming from our phones, they used to have ads that would come on, and they say that you had to hear that ad 13 times before your brain would actually recognize that you'd heard it once. Basically, to have that realization that, oh, that's a new ad. No, it's probably the 13th time you'd heard it. And I think, when it comes to staff and communications, that same thing holds true. We often, because it's where we live as the entrepreneur and the business owner, we feel like, oh man, we've been through this so many times. But those employees need to have that reminded on such a regular basis so that they know what to claim onto, and where those map points are that they're going. They need to know in what they're doing as it relates to the ship. They need to know that they're doing the things that will allow you as the captain to get it there. And if they don't know that you're where you're headed or what the goals and objectives are, they can't do their job well either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think often of like Marines or firefighters or people that you know are always training, always training, always training. And I don't think it's altogether different for just, the average Joe company
Hmm.
and their employees to need a similar, at least scheduled regiment of training. It doesn't mean it's hard, but I do think it needs to be regular and repeated.
Yes.
And that's both personal training and a company policy training and SOP training. So any, standard processes that one has, you need to remind people what those are because it's not necessarily a habit that's been, drilled into their brain. So having
Exactly.
that training, I find is just critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, repeating some of that because it wasn't just once. And I still struggle with that today. It's like, but didn't we just say that? But all of those messages need to be repeated on a consistent basis because that's how they become part of what people's understanding is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think one of the other things I mentioned it just briefly earlier, but knowing our employees and doing those DISC assessments, those Kersey
Mm.
Bates tests, and not only showing them what they are, but
Hmm.
showing them what we are so that there's that communication
I
component
love that
that
part
we
of it. Yeah.
understand each other because ultimately all of this is about communication, right? We
Yeah.
need to be able to communicate with our employees. They need to be able to communicate with us. We have to keep that flow open. We have to identify bottlenecks and
Hmm.
gatekeepers and some of those key words that you hear maybe a bit of, but you don't really take all that seriously because you're too busy trying to keep your business afloat, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But those, if you can, to focus on some of those things with your team, it'll just make your team so much happier and mentally healthy, and your business will just run so much more smoothly.
Yeah, no, I could not agree with you more. It's amazing when we think back to some of the lessons that we've learned over the years and how incredibly naive, at least I'll speak for myself, that I was,
Yeah, me too.
um, you know, thinking that, running a business is easy because I certainly know the people I worked for didn't have a clue, and at least that's how I felt so often. And then you get in there and you realize there's so many things you weren't thinking about. And while certainly there are things that we could improve from maybe where we'd been, I think that as we began to embrace the things that they did well, I remember taking things, especially from some of your employers where you'd spent time and some of the things they did really well and trying to figure out how to embrace that within our small business really made some huge differences. You talked earlier about the planning and the vision and all that. And those are always things I kind of poo-pooed because I'm like, yeah, that just is a feel-good stuff. It doesn't matter. But I found out it really did matter to the team and it helped provide those guardrails that we could then give them the latitude to say, all right, within these guardrails, you can make decisions and you can do that. But
Right?
we want to give you the guidelines to follow so that you feel secure that you're not going to run off this road. And I never attributed it to, driving down a mountain road that had literally thousands of feet drop offs without any guardrails. That's crazy. I remember doing that in Rocky Mountain National Park and going, I don't like this. But I never realized that employees felt that way if you didn't give them those guidelines to follow. They then were unsure as well, and they'd never get very close to that edge because they were so afraid of what might happen. And as a result, they often ended up on a very narrow path and weren't as effective, didn't take the initiative, didn't even do things that they maybe thought they should because they were so worried about that edge. And once we gave them those guardrails, it allowed them to open up and go, okay, now I know where the edge is and I can go up to the edge safely because I know I have those constraints and those rules or not rules, but the guidelines to do it.
Right. Empowerment is huge. It's sort of like being a parent. You want your children to follow certain rules so they're safe and they're happy and they grow in a direction that's going to do themselves good, right? But you at the same time have to allow them to explore and to find their own way and be able to problem solve themselves. And you have to teach them those tools. You have to enable them to do
Yes.
good things. And that's just, it's huge. It's not just in parenting, but it's in being a leader of a company with employees as well. I just think that's really, it's an epiphany that I certainly had. But being a business owner, being a leader, that's a growth journey, and we're still
Oh,
on it.
yes.
I know for myself, I'm still learning better ways to be a better leader, and how to really relay that information to our employees who, when we first started our business, we were like teenagers, right? We thought we knew it all.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
We're through it and it's like, oh wow, we don't know it all. In fact, we really don't know much at all. And so we had to surround ourselves and grow through that journey. But I'm so glad, Jonathan, that you and I have been doing this together. You've been a wonderful life and business partner just to experience the leadership journey and the entrepreneurial journey with. So thank you for that.
Well, and ditto, because as I've said many times, and I will probably say till the day that I'm no longer here, if it wasn't for you, I would be leading a company of 3 people, myself and 2 others who were looking for jobs because I was driving them crazy. So, we have definitely complemented each other well, and it's made a great life for us, and we've been blessed.
Well, thank you for talking with me today about this topic. I think hopefully it has helped some people out there kind of know what we've gone through and have encouragement for their own futures. Do you want to wrap us up today?
Yeah, we just want to thank you for joining us on the Business Alchemy podcast. Beth and I have, again, had so many experiences over the years, and we love answering your questions and sharing some of the things that have worked and some of those that maybe haven't, and hopefully having a few chuckles along the way. Entrepreneurship can be a lonely journey, but it's so incredibly rewarding as well. And we hope that we can help you make it more rewarding and a little bit less lonely. With that, please, if you like the podcast, subscribe, give us your feedback, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye, everyone.